Target. If you live in America especially, you're probably very familiar with Target. They're one of the largest retailers in the nation, and arguably the principal competitor to Walmart. Target is known for being a bit more upscale for a big box store. Their stores are generally a lot nicer, and their products are a bit more expensive, but again, nicer. They're not super expensive, and they do offer certain deals on certain things, with a wide varying selection, but people like going to them because, frankly, they're just not Walmart anymore, is kind of the deal. Now, Target's story is long, like way longer than you'd think. The origins of what would become Target go all the way back to 1902. But we're not really talking about Target in this video. I mean, we are, but we're going to zero in on a subsidiary of Target. Target Canada! Canada! Hockey, and Tim Hortons, and Moose. That Canada, our northern neighbors that we get along with pretty well in America, all things considered. We don't really have any major issues between each other. We get along and hang out, and everything's happy, everything's wonderful. But there are some key differences between the United States and Canada that Target didn't really consider. Because, as you can imagine, Target Canada, as a subsidiary of the Target Corporation, was meant to be the company's introduction to Canada. And this seems like a reasonable thing to do, because if you're an American company and you're going international, going to Canada seems like a logical step. It's right there. The cultural differences between the United States and Canada aren't that vast, and they share a continent, a border, a very long border. They're right there. So it's not an unreasonable thing to do. Walmart did it, and they've been doing pretty well up in Canada. But Target didn't really have a good go at this at all. It was bad. It was really bad. But why? What did they do wrong here? Target was heavily delayed getting themselves into Canada in the first place, partially due to some trademark issues. See, Target isn't exactly an original name. It's one word, and it's a common word. Like, a target refers to, a target. The big box chain weren't the only ones trying to utilize the name in Canada. There was a variety store chain located in Newfoundland and Labrador that operated in the 1980s and early 90s, and there was even a liquor store named Target Liquor located in Edmonton. There was also a convenience store chain named Target based in Toronto. The point is, a lot of other smaller companies were utilizing the Target brand, and Target Corporation wanted to solidify their rights to the name before they actually entered the country. As a result, they had to buy the trademark rights from several of these existing users, and filing new applications for the name on their own. But it wasn't just stores using their name, it was also clothing. See, one of the big benefits of going to Target over, say, Walmart, is that Target likes using their in-house brands that they own. Therefore, they can not only make more of a profit, but also be more heavily involved in quality control, and while at the same time making more of a profit, also actually offer these things at a lower price than you'd otherwise get because, again, they own them, they're their brands. But some of the brands were under the Target name. But the Canadian trademark, Target Apparel, had been registered in 1981 by a company named Dillex Limited. Now, that retailer had been defunct since the early 2000s, and the rights to that trademark were acquired in 2001 by Fairweather Limited. They utilized it the same way the actual Target was utilizing the name as a private label clothing brand. Eventually, though, they did open a small Target apparel retail store adjacent to their head office in December of 2003. And Fairweather got a little scummy when it came to this, because the second Target announced in late 2010 that they wanted to expand into Canada, Fairweather turned right around and started expanding their Target apparel banner to other higher profile locations just to mess with Target. Target then had to challenge their rights to the Target apparel trade name, though at first Fairweather managed to retain the rights, since they did legally acquire them. It wasn't like they were using the name unlawfully. Technically speaking, in Canada, they did have the rights to that brand, even though in America, Target did. but by February of 2012, they finally did reach an agreement. The details of which aren't exactly clear, but Fairweather did agree to stop using the name by 2013. And frankly, to me, this just implies that Target gave them just a whole bunch of money to get them to stop, and they were like, okay, they'll stop now. In between all this legal hassle, Target had been rumored to be wanting to get into Canada since the early 2000s. They didn't really start getting around to it until 2011. On January 13th of that year, they announced their plans to purchase the lease agreements of up to 220 stores under the Zellers name. Now, Zellers is a name that most of my Canadian audience probably does know. They were a chain of Canadian discount stores that was founded all the way back in 1931. The chain peaked with 350 locations in 1999, but by the 2010s they had been on a steep decline. Target realized they could use the previous infrastructure and locations to their advantage, and wound up purchasing the lease agreements from the Zellers company for $1.825 billion. It was a huge acquisition, though it did help Hudson's Bay Company, HBC, which was Zellers' parent company. HBC wound up retaining 64 Zellers locations, but by 2012 they announced that even those would also be liquidated. And as far as I'm able to tell, you can't find standalone Zellers stores anymore, though Hudson's Bay department stores do still exist, and they've decided to reintroduce the brand as a store within a store concept in 2023, which I hate. Seriously, how many times do these dead franchises do store within a store? I don't like it. It feels stupid to me. But sometimes it does work, so whatever. Zellers is their own story. Got completely off track, sorry about that. But with Target taking over the leases, it meant they could do whatever they wanted with the property, within the confines of the lease, of course. And that meant retooling those Zellers locations into brand new Target locations. Excellent, excellent. And this isn't a bad strategy. Not only did they not have to build a new building, but they were purchasing other big box locations. Like, they already had the space in there, they just had to remodel them into Target rather than Zellers. One of the complaints with Zellers, especially towards the end, is that they kind of became Canadian Kmart, in the sense that, yeah, they offered some deals on occasion, they were cheap, but also inside was really gross and dingy. But Target is the opposite of that. Target likes to make sure their stores are always nice, and that was one of the first praises when Target wound up opening, and that they were way nicer inside than the old Zellers had been. So they did a great job with the remodel. But the whole thing wasn't perfect. Remember when I talked about Woolworths and their little big box experiment Woolco? And how Walmart had acquired a whole bunch of Woolco stores? Well, Walmart had done that for their entry into Canada. That was back in '94. And when Walmart bought Woolco, they actually retained the old staff that was already working at those locations, which was actually really nice of them. Like, that meant those people weren't losing their jobs. They were working for a different company, but they kept them around. That was really chill. But Target acquiring Zellers wasn't the case. And technically speaking, all the employees were laid off, though they were given the opportunity to reapply for their position to continue work. Some did get their jobs back, though some didn't. Target would go on record saying that former Zellers workers were guaranteed an interview, but they weren't guaranteed a job. The United Food and Commercial Workers Union of Canada would complain about this, pointing out that plenty of employees that had been working for Zellers, some for years, had not been rehired when they feel like they should have been. Regardless of this controversy, the first Target stores in Canada were finally opened on March 5th, 2013, over in Ontario. And that was a strategic decision because they were close to one of Target Canada's 3 distribution centers. But distribution was one of their earliest issues. Target Canada had serious supply chain problems. Like, really bad supply chain problems. And the thing is, when it comes to big box chains especially, supply chains are everything. Getting product to the location is mission critical. That was one of the big benefits of Walmart, and one of the reasons why they did so well, because their supply chain infrastructure was second to none. Now, in America, Target's supply chains are really good too. They compete pretty well with Walmart in this regard, but their Canada outing was not the same type of situation. They had huge, massive issues getting products to their stores, and even though that problem existed and was known, remember, Target Canada is a subsidiary. And as a subsidiary, they have to bow to the parent company, the Target Corporation. And the parent company didn't want to delay the opening date to fix the supply chain issues. So they opened the stores knowing that issue existed. And as a result, a lot of the stores, when they ran out of product, just kind of ran out of product. That they weren't able to get what they needed in a timely manner. Very similar to Kmart. Another issue they ran into was, remember, they had bought a lot of the sellers' leases, and they planned wholeheartedly to utilize those leases. They opened a ton of locations very, very, very quickly. Normally it's advisable, especially when you're having supply chain issues, to ease into any new market. Test the waters, make sure it's okay. Have one really good location that you know is in a good spot and see how it does. Don't just go ham and open up a whole bunch just all over the place. Well, they went ham, is what they did. By 2015, they had 133 locations. They opened over 100 stores within 2 years in a brand new market that they really weren't sure was going to work while they were having supply chain problems. You already can't supply the stores you have, and you're opening more. Now, I understand they did buy a whole bunch of leases, and in this situation, they'd still be paying for the leases even if they didn't open the stores. So I believe the logic here was, well, if we get the stores open, we can at least start making some money. And yeah, that makes sense. Also, though, you would then be spending a whole bunch of money on remodeling those stores and staffing those stores, and then only making your supply chain issues worse, because now you have to figure out how to supply all these other stores when you can't even supply your core ones. Do you see the disconnect here? Well, they didn't. Or, well, they might have, because Target Canada's president was a man named Tony Fisher. And to be honest, Fisher did a pretty good job. Now you might be saying, well, you just said there's supply chain issues and all this other hubbub. How can you say Tony Fisher was a good leader? Well, because he was operating with his hands tied behind his back. He was subservient to whatever corporate wanted him to do. They gave him very strict, very clear goals. But the goals were completely unrealistic given what he was dealing with. He did the best he could in a really stupid situation. And he tried his best in most regards. But as he put it, the Canadian market was not the same as the American market. It wasn't just the supply chain. If it was just that, they probably could have worked it out. In fact, Fisher would eventually wind up working out the supply chain problems. That was mostly a non-factor by 2014. But do you want to know what was always a factor? Canada being filthy communists! Okay, that's not true exactly. But Canada does have a lot more of a socialism element to it. I think most of us are aware of that. They have government-issued healthcare, for example. And that's really nice, because free healthcare, we like that. Also, that costs money. And there are a lot of different taxes and fees that go along with operating in Canada that don't apply here in America. One of the issues that Target Canada was running into was pricing. Their prices were often much higher than not only their immediate competitors in Canada, but also American Target. Which, why? Why would you be charging more for the same thing when American Target isn't doing that? And in fact, many customers that lived close to the border would cross the border to shop at American Target and not even bother going to the Canadian version because of this. But Fisher explained that everything that goes into running a business, whether it be the supply chains, whether it be the staffing, whether it be the stocking, everything that goes into operation was just more expensive in Canada. He would say, quote, transportation costs are higher, distribution costs are higher, fuel costs are higher, wage rates vary across the country, the tax rates are different, cost of goods are different, the duties, I think the scale we have here in Canada is quite different from the incredibly different, densely populated US marketplace. Basically, everything was more expensive in Canada. It was as simple as that. And because everything was more expensive, that meant operating costs were more expensive. And if operating costs are more expensive, that means your overhead costs are more expensive. And if your overhead costs are more expensive, you have to charge more for the product in order to actually attempt to make a profit. That was their issue. And it wasn't something they could do really anything about. What were they going to do about that? It was just the way Canada was. They'd also invested in a brand new SAP inventory software system to help with the supply chain issues. But the staff weren't properly trained on the system, and the system wasn't perfect and had bugs, which only compounded getting product into the stores. And even when they did, it was more expensive than basically everywhere else. And for the Canadian shoppers, that extra cost wasn't necessarily worth it, especially when they could cross the border to go to Target in America, or go to not Target. Canada has their own chains, pre-established chains, that are known and trusted. Zellers may have gone under, but that didn't mean everybody did. And even Walmart was established by this point. People knew them in Canada, and knew what they had, and knew they could go there. Walmart had worked through the pricing issue, and did make it a point to undercut Target in many aspects. While Target Canada had a pretty strong opening, they fell off very quickly. So bad was this fall off that they dragged down their own parent company's second quarter results. It was awful. The issue seemed to be that while many Canadian shoppers gave them a chance immediately, which explains the high traffic at first, they weren't returning often enough. They had a significant issue with customer retention. Many people went to Target, saw the prices, and said, yeah, I'm just gonna go not here. And they did that. Target Canada's strategy was also a little bit too, well, American, honestly. See, like many big box stores, they went for the one-stop shopping, and they modeled themselves based on that. But Canadians don't really shop this way. Big boxes still exist up there, like I said, Walmart does, but Canadian customers have a habit of picking and choosing between different strengths of retailers. They're still very old school in their shopping approach, in that they'll shop around. They'll go to multiple different places, and go to wherever the best deals are to save money. It was noted that Canadians would even carry in shopping bags from competitors because they came from there. That's just how Canadians like to shop. Whereas in America, I guess we're a bit more lazy and just like going to one place. And while Target's remodeling of the old Zellers locations was praised because, yeah, they were a lot nicer, Zellers had been way cheaper. They had offered pretty good deals, which Target absolutely could not do. The pricing seemed to be their biggest problem. Even when they got the supply chain issue sorted, people just weren't buying the stuff because it was more expensive. In some cases, Walmart absolutely stomped them into the dirt on this issue, undercutting Target by as much as 65% on popular items through their rollback program. Analysts looking over the situation believe that Target Corporation, the parent company, just expected too much from Canada way too quickly. They projected that Canadian operations would bring in 10% of their overall profit by 2017, but none of this took into account demographic differences, as well as differences in shopping habits, but also domestic competition. It wasn't like they only had to worry about Walmart. I mean, Walmart was bad enough, but there were plenty of other Canadian retailers that people were way more familiar with, and in some cases more loyal to. All this, on top of a major security breach the company suffered in January 2014, meant that the CEO of the parent organization, Greg Steinhoffel, would resign. 2 weeks after that, Tony Fisher, president of Target Canada, was dismissed and replaced by a man named Mark Schindel. Though, as I said, Fisher really wasn't at fault here. He was given tasks and goals that were completely unreasonable for anybody to get to. The blame for all this stands way more with Target Corporation rather than Fisher. Though it is worth mentioning that while they did replace Fisher, the man who replaced Steinhoffel, Brian Cornell, as CEO of Target Corporation, had been hired from outside the company, and when he got there, he was already pretty against Target Canada. He didn't like that there was this black hole on their expense reports. They just weren't making money there, and if they weren't making money there, he thought it was best to cut it off. But he did give Schindel the chance to improve things, though made it perfectly clear that if he didn't, very quickly, he was gonna shut things down. And frankly, that's exactly what happened. Within just a year, January 15th, 2015, after a holiday season that just didn't do very well, which is always a bad sign for any retailer, Target Canada was forced to announce that it would commence court-supervised restructuring proceedings under the company's Creditors Arrangement Act. Now, maybe you don't know what that means, and I understand. Well, it's something that's called the CCAA, and it's a statute of the Parliament of Canada that allows insolvent corporations owing their creditors in excess of $5 million to restructure their business and financial affairs. And you might be sitting there thinking, you mean bankruptcy? And basically, yeah, honestly, in effect, just in Canada, because they don't want to say the word bankruptcy, because it's scary. Actually, that's a joke. They do have bankruptcy in Canada. The CCAA is similar, but a little bit different. But regardless, though, we'll just consider it a similar thing, because the result is the same. It was basically Chapter 7 liquidation. They announced plans to close all 133 stores, and 2 new store openings were canceled. During these proceedings, crunching the numbers, they realized how much of a disaster Target Canada really had been. From the beginning to the end in 2015, the subsidiary had lost Target Corporation $2.1 billion. And based off of the growth they were seeing, the little there was, they weren't projected to make any profit until at least 2021. That's horrid. It was so bad that they wouldn't have been able to meet their employees' payroll for the week of January 16, 2015, had it not filed for the court protections, which is why they did it, and they were able to pay their workers. But the following day after the filing, liquidation sales immediately began. They began closing stores on March 18th, and they were all shut down by April 12th. They sold off the leases, a few even went to Walmart, which is hilarious, and since that time, Target really hasn't attempted to touch Canada again. It just didn't seem like a good idea. They did briefly offer Canadian shoppers a way to buy from them, though. In October of 2015, after all the stores were shut down, they began offering international shipping on goods sold online, which meant that Canadian shoppers could simply go on Target's website and buy from them that way. Prices were converted to Canadian dollars, excluding the duties and taxes, but that only lasted about 5 years or so. In February of 2020, Target opted to discontinue all international shipping options, meaning that Canadians can no longer buy from them effectively. The only way to do so is to cross the border and shop at the American locations, and some Canadians still do that. The ones that live close enough to the border do on occasion make that an option, but Target hasn't made a serious attempt at it again, because frankly it just went so badly. Billions of dollars in the hole, all for a profit of nothing. They got nothing out of this. It was awful. It was a disaster. It was so bad that Robert Modem, who was a Toronto-based playwright, spent 2 years interviewing former Target Canada employees so he could actually put on a stage performance within an empty Target store, retelling the tale in theater, which is just... I'm sorry. That's great, though. That is phenomenal. That's how bad it was, though. Like, it was infamous, and it's attached to a known and successful brand like Target. You'd think going in they'd have the good sense to do this correctly. They're able to duke it out with Walmart here in America. People love Target here in America. But Canada's just not quite the same. We have more things in common than differences, sure. I think in terms of international relations and cultural relations, Canada and the United States are one of the best examples of 2 countries that almost always get along really well, especially over the last century or so. But there are differences that Target did not account for whatsoever when they did this. They expanded way too quickly, did not think supply chains were that big a deal when they absolutely are, and didn't think about, we're charging a lot for this stuff. Maybe we should find a way to not do that, especially when you have entrenched competition and a consumer culture that's still centered around the idea of spending a whole day shopping to find the best deals. Target Canada's biggest problem is that basically always, they never had the best deals. Everyone else did. So why would anyone keep going there? Sure, the stores were nice, and many of the products were too. It gets to a point where a certain group of people just won't pay for certain things. They'll go elsewhere, and maybe not get the same product, but something close enough, much cheaper. Target didn't figure out a way around this, and didn't bother to before investing billions into the project. Billions that they had no hope of getting back. And with that, a special thank you Goes out to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Jack Carson's River Videos, Lord Off 444, I Surfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Red Lion, NS Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Josh Johnson, Kid of Brainwaters, Perez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Dolinsky, JBL Explorers, Tommy Rossini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mark Holding, Mr. Terevel, Hayden DeGrow, Bad Train Puns Are Best, Kurt Forcum, Harry, Drew Debris, George Kenny, Kevin Wood, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Hannah Bird, Duralshi, A Person 723, William Nemo, Dr. Racer 78, Shimasu, Metal for Life Guy, Andrew Bowen, Crimson Rose, Ryan Wehofer, Zintac M, Boss K, Orange Glass, Andy, Ohio Trucker 1, Windy City Rails, John Videola, Extra Special J, Bob Kondirk, Jared Brussel, Levi Anderson, Darrell Williams, DE Ultra, Connor Hahn, AJNH86, Brian Philly, DFL Church, Murder Drone Stall, Nathaniel Brown, Robert Baldessari, Liam Wright, Mr. Sleepy, AET Museum, Jonathan Coco, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness, and a visual of fun. Farewell.